Welcome back to ReactJS Columbus. We are so happy to be back this evening and have some exciting talks ahead. Want to, I guess, give a quick intro to the couple of talks we have tonight. We have Walt Tingley with us this evening, who's going to be telling us a little bit about style components. And we're going to follow that up with Brendan Mills, who's going to tell us a little bit about bundle splitting. I guess just to quickly, before we jump right in, do a quick couple of sponsor shout-outs. First of all, I want to thank IGS Energy for hosting us this evening, and for graciously providing some of the drinks and space and everything else for making this possible. So, quick round of applause for them. Eric, I don't know if you wanted to do any kind of quick spiel.
Yeah, I can talk about IGS real quick. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, you're at IGS, and this is so what we do is we're an energy supplier. So we kind of exist between, behind the utility. So if you have the utility, we supply your energy, and then you would basically buy the energy from us, but your utility would still provide it. That's kind of a dry explanation of what we do, but that's our core business. We're also getting into some other more exciting fields, residential solar, commercial solar. We're doing a huge project here in Ohio. He's providing something like 4 megawatts of solar power for a community. Don't quote me on that, but there's some really exciting press releases if you're interested. Walt Tingley, who you're about to hear speak, works here. Don't let that deter you from being interested. But yeah, we're doing some really exciting things in the solar field. Some grid balancing stuff. There's a better word for that, but I don't remember it.
Regulation.
Grid regulation, so which helps with renewable energy. Some really cool things. But yeah, so if you're interested, there's a lot of us here from IGS today, obviously. So just ask around and talk. We do like hiring good developers. So if you consider yourself to be a good developer, better than Walt, you'll quickly find out how good he is. Then yeah, get in touch. And that's it.
Cool. Thanks so much, Eric. And then other sponsor for this evening is Calio Technology. I guess you can think of it as kind of a provider of holistic bootcamp format engineering onboarding services for different companies. Really just try to instill engineering best practices, especially emerging technologies and frameworks within companies. Really try to make engineering more of a fun field to be in. Depending upon places where you've worked, I'm sure many of you have seen that in many cases you're just kind of thrown in the mix, and we try to make it a little bit more of a truly a guided process and really learning best practices along the way, so that you can be a better developer, be a better engineer, and likewise have a better culture in companies as well. I guess one final note before we jump in. Want to again just put a shout out there for any speakers, interested speakers, topics for future meetups, as well as future host companies. So if you personally work with React and want to do a talk on a React-related topic, definitely reach out to us. And likewise, if you work for a company that is using React and they're interested in hosting this meetup in the future, we'd love to chat. So with no further ado, let's have Walt come up and tell us a little bit about components.
Hello everyone, my name is Walt Hingley. I work here at IGS Energy. I've been here about 4 years, full stack developer. I am not a designer. Let me just start with that. One of the things that kind of drew me to style components is the fact that I'm not a designer. So if you're a designer, maybe you don't agree with a lot of things here, but let's see. All right. So a little bit about me. I run. I have 2 dogs. One's really great, the other one's not. I play a lot of video games, play some hockey, and I drink a lot of beer. So just a little bit about me. I have a couple slides here. Then we'll get into some code. So why style components? A couple of the shortcomings of CSS are you have your name collisions. It's hard to organize, hard to find out where things are in your what's affecting what. It gets kind of difficult. If you write a lot of back-end code or even JavaScript, like like your variables, your functions. You can't really get that in CSS very well. And everything you work on exists outside of what you're actually working on. So you have to have multiple files open. You have to kind of track things down. It's a little bit less clean. So some things came along throughout history to fix this, and you have Sass, less, and they are improvements, but there's a couple things that still just kind of doesn't sit very well. So like you have an external build process, it's not inline. Your styles are still separate from what you're working on. You still have to use some sort of BEM or equivalent naming convention, which I see them as gross. So, come to style components. Each component is going to have its own class name assigned to it. It's going to be a hash. You're never going to have to worry about collisions. And how many times have you guys written something and you're like, oh, got to go back and style that? Your whole design was, you put no thought into your styling. With style components, it kind of forces you to. It's a lot more difficult to just throw some divs and some links and tags and whatever, and then, I'll go back and style that later and hope I don't have to change my entire document structure. So it's one of the nice things, I think, as someone that has always kind of treated CSS as a second or third class citizen. So another nice thing is you get full power of JavaScript. If you can do it in JavaScript, you can kind of do it in any sort of logic you want for your class application or even just style application. You can still use external style sheets. You won't have any name collisions because of the generated hash, so that's nice. You still have some of the downsides of using CSS though. And there's no additional build configuration. It just kind of works. Your Webpack's set up for JavaScript. It's going to work with style components. So let's get into the more fun part here. What I did, and there'll be a Git repo you can go to also. Does this font look good? Can you make it bigger? Just read it in the back. Good. All right.
Good.
Close that then. So I have, if you get the repo at some point, I have 7 different folders. I don't want to live code because that never ends well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started here. To give you a little bit of a thought process on how I set this up, basically, let me type real quick. Look downside of that. So I found a to-do list on online. That's not it. That's not it. Let's see. All right, I found a to-do list online, just base React, and stripped out all the CSS that they had included. I figured it'd be a kind of good starting point to kind of show how your base HTML gets transformed and looks better. I'm not going to say great, because like I said, I'm not a designer. So you have a base to-do list here. You can click things, and then add some more. Nothing fancy, just good base. So let me switch to the next one. Man, this table brings my mouse down to the bottom every time. So number 2 here, this is base style components. Let me show you the to do now. So did a couple things here. Created style wrapper down at the bottom, which is going to be the same for all of them. It's basically your standard, here's my to-do item button. Then you can pass it, instead of doing style.div, which is, yep. Well, style wrapper, from style wrapper, there you go. So instead of just doing style.div and passing it, this is shared. All of them are going to use those same exact properties. And then in the to-do, it takes that in. It's going to apply all of those and then either go red, yellow, or blue. Just simple composition of styles. It just does a mod and returns. So you're going to add another one's going to be red and continues. So nothing really has changed down here. We're also at this point kind of adding the props to it. And like general, you write React, you're used to having props passed in. So style components can use those to make style decisions based on it. What is that here? So you can see right here in the to-do link, if it's already been, you clicked it, instead it's completed, it's now going to have a line through instead of text decoration none. So what happens is you use your tag template literals, which is anyone not familiar with those? I can give a quick follow through on. I'll do it anyways. Let's do it. So tag template literals, basically, it's a function that the first parameter is going to be a string. You can write this, with a open close parentheses, and it's a string. It's kind of just a little cleaner to write with the backticks. But this essentially it's a string. That's all it is. Which is why you can use your standard $, curly brace to pass variables into it. So each individual, actually I believe this is also an array, which is why you have to pass props in on each one. Each line itself gets passed props. So props gets passed in. Is it completed? If so, line through. If not, none. Still pretty basic, but you can kind of see how you get to leverage JavaScript to help with your classes and your styling. I think that's let me see. And I just wanted to point it out. You probably assumed, but you can style inputs. You can style basically any HTML element if you want. It doesn't have to just be divs. They're if you look through their TypeScript devs, it's kind of clear on what all there is. There's a lot. So let's go here to the next one. So, what if you need to load a font? You want to load that site-wide. So, talk about it supports globals. You shouldn't be using globals much, but sometimes you do. If you use globals, you're essentially writing CSS, which is what you're trying to fix. So don't really suggest using it a lot, but sometimes you need to. So I'm going to have a couple in here. To see, there's a inject global you can import, and I just say margin 0 and this sweet indie flower font. Let's take a look here. Refresh. Oh yeah. Just want to make sure everyone knows that the font changed. So injecting globals, not too difficult. Like I said, you don't really want to use it if you can avoid it. But sometimes you have to. Another quick example, you can use media tags, all those types of things. Let me bring it up here. So I added them in, global, where I told you not to put them. We'll fix that here in a step or two. But, just if it's width 600 or less, be one color. And ooh. So.
I thought you said you weren't.
So, media tags work. The great thing about style components is, we all write JavaScript, we all write CSS. You don't have to learn anything special. It's just, JavaScript and CSS. You just put it in a tag template literal, and it works. You don't have to learn anything special. We'll go back to that. So, hit background color, gray and light blue. So now we're getting to some of the more fun stuff. Those ones are pretty basic, just want to give you an idea of what it's like. So now we're going to get to mix-ins. All right, you'll see the top one kind of got a little bit dim there. So mix-ins, I've actually never really used mix-ins before. I'm realizing that's probably a mistake. They're pretty nice. Like I said, CSS has primarily been a background thought, but this really kind of makes you want to make it you want to make it a primary focus. So I have this styles.js file, has a couple mix-ins in it. Here's one for media, so got to remove that inject global now. Well, change it to inject global. So now it's a little more reusable. You could also use this for any other element you wanted to switch based on your media screen size. In this example, I'm just changing the background because that's easy to see. You'll see a couple other things change. I'll get into those as well. So here in the styles, you'll see here small and large. All this is a function. It returns CSS. This is weird little CSS tag here. All this does is take all these and treat them individually. If you don't do this, it'll toString it and you don't get what you want. There's a little bit more on the Style Components website if you want to see exactly how it works, but by and large, you can just kind of pass in a tag template literal to it and it'll properly handle it. So what I'm doing here is adding a media tag for these. Like the great thing about this is, if let's say you have 5 different screen sizes you support, you could have all 5 of them in here. You can change your breakpoints. You know, I can make this 580 and 581 very easily in any place in the screen that wants to do some sort of different CSS for that screen size will just automatically pick up those changes. You don't have to go to each single spot and make those changes. Another one I have in here, and it's kind of a different use case, but I think it's still very valid for something you want to do, is there's an opacity function here. It takes it in, and it's going to output all 5 of these different opacity CSS styles. So it's kind of nice if you have to, I know a lot of times you'll just use polyfill or something along those lines to do this, but it's kind of nice if you need to do specific changes, or even just group a bunch of styles together so that you can kind of have that consistent look and feel everywhere and easy central place to make those changes. So let's see what we actually did here. A couple examples. So using multiple mix-ins in this one, you have your media small, change the background color to pink, and the opacity to half, which you can see. These colors are kind of washed out, but you can get the idea there. Down here in yellow wrapper, we actually do a mix-in based on whether the other mix-in is hit. So you can kind of pass them to each other, and you get kind of the same functionality you'd expect being a JavaScript developer. One other thing I forgot to bring up that's pretty important is, if you use like Bootstrap or React Bootstrap, or any library that will fail if you have specific props passed in. Style components can handle that. You have to kind of, I don't have the syntax in here, but you have to do destructuring on the props passed and then call it on that, and pull out the unsupported props that you're going to switch on your CSS, and then you can kind of pass it in to another style where it has the tag template literal that you can use the props but still not blow up your base component. It's not as hard as I made it sound right there, but it does look a little weird. Let's see. Yeah, so let's go here to theming. I've never actually done theming before, but that's also a mistake. Should have been doing this a lot. It is, the way that Style Components does it is absolutely fantastic. Let me switch it to that. This is really actually kind of awkward with the mic in hand, sorry guys. Let's see here. Saw a little bit of change. I have a swap theme button. It's pretty sweetly designed there. So you can change your colors, your style sheet very, very easily. So let me show you how this works. I also added a bunch that does it on all the colors. So let's look here. So a couple things you'll notice, we have original theme and new theme. I'll start with the original theme. So basically it just takes a plain JavaScript object. You can set up your structure however you want. I'm not sure what the best way to do this is. I'm assuming, I think going component level, and then if you have different media sizes might be better. I just did it on here with media, small and large, because that's what I was kind of naming the mix-ins. But you can set this up however you want, and you'll see how you reference it. And then new theme is the same thing, just different colors. So let's go to the index. On the index, just import the themes, like you normally would. Ooh.
Alright, we're back.
All right, that's sweet. So what you do here is, I'm assuming a lot of you work with Redux or React Route or any of those. It's basically the same kind of premise. Down here on the index, you're after a theme provider. Same standard thing that most people, most of the other projects you use. And all I'm doing here is setting on load set state theme is original theme. Pretty basic. And then swap button is right here. Does a swap theme, so if it's the original theme, go to the new theme. If not, go back to the original theme. Pretty easy to handle. I'm sure. Trust me, I just took some guys' to-do list here, so I'm not advocating this folder structure or anything, but it is a good base for this type of talk. So let's get in here on how the themes are actually called. All right, here we go. So what happens is it passes in the theme on props. So here in the mix-ins get a little weird with this. You have to do props before you call the mix-in to get passed in. And then you can call, you can also do destruction if you get it in one of these, just to show it. But you do props.theme.media small.2, which is exactly where it was right here. So you can see it's pretty simple. To me, it's kind of a no-brainer to use it because if I want to change these things, then I have one place, centrally located, kind of cleans up your CSS quite a bit. Very easy to change. With this pattern, if you have a web and an internal, it's kind of easy to change your theme in there as well. Like you can kind of do whatever, set up your themes however you really want to. I just changed, theme to do color. Something easy there. And so themes in Style Components is pretty great. I'm gonna definitely start using these on new projects. I don't know. I really like Style Components because of the fact that it allows you to organize your CSS like it's JavaScript, which I like. Assuming most people probably do. Other than that, I'm gonna have questions.
Is this a React-only thing, or does it work with other frameworks?
The question was, is style components a React only thing? Style components, I'm not 100% sure, I believe so. There's Emotion is a newer one. It's doesn't have quite as much support as style components, but it's gaining some. One of the nice things about it is there's Babel transpilers that can kind of convert your style component syntax, and I believe it supports a few others, like Glamour and a couple of those, I think. And can kind of make it so you can use, and I know that Emotion is not React specific, but it looks very similar in use and functionality. Any other questions?
How easy is it to share? How easy is it to share? So you have an input type, and you're sharing that across multiple inputs. So what would be an example? Input password and input text. You want to share that same style across. How easy is that to make it apparent that users are sharing the same styles?
The question is how easy it is to share styles across multiple input types or multiple components.
Yeah.
So you can really just you can set up your containers in a way that it could be, I guess it could be a child of a container and use that, or there's different ways you can set up your components so that your styling can be at one level and then something below and pass it in. It's pretty easy. I mean, you do it once or twice, you'll get the feel for it, but it's definitely can be done, and it's not that difficult to do. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
And I believe the guy behind you had a question as well.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there auto prefixer support like post CSS, and can you bundle your CSS out of the JavaScript bundle?
I believe there is support for the bundling outside of the JavaScript. I'm not 100% sure on the other two. I don't know the answer to the other two, but I'm pretty confident that I've seen people referencing having your CSS separate. Any other questions?
Where's the documentation located?
All right, questions, where's the documentation located? I actually have one more slide here that has a couple references. It's on this site. This is the to-do branch that I pulled down. I just thought it'd be nice to at least give them credit. It's kind of old, but works. And here's the my repo for this slide. There's a little bash script in there. You probably saw me typing. You don't have to use that, but it'll work to kind of switch between the sources a little faster. But Stock Components site actually has pretty good documentation. Stock Components has been around for a while, so there's a lot of user support, as questions. If you put some on Stack Overflow, you'll get an answer most likely. It's pretty popular.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anyone? Going once, going twice? All right, well, thank you very much. If you have any questions that you think of later, you can find me afterwards, and I'll be glad to talk through it with you.
So, my name is Brandon Mills. I'm here to talk about code splitting in React. And the idea for this talk actually came out of two things. On the right there is the ESLint logo. I'm one of the maintainers for ESLint. And so anything obscure or trivia that I know about JavaScript probably came from a long issue thread, and there's a sad story and a facepalm behind it. On the left there is Drive Capital, my employer. Thank you, job security. But the impetus for this talk actually came from some work I did on our app last year. So Drive Capital is a venture capital firm, to give you some background. And our whole business is built on relationships with companies and people. And so what the engineering team there has built is, I guess you could consider part of it a souped up CRM. But we have a central source of truth for everything we know about all the companies and all the people that we've met with. So we have a home page and search, we have profiles on companies and people, we've got stats, and we've got different ways to aggregate data. But Google Analytics tells us that, say, 90% of visits to our site use the profile pages, and only 2% use the stats. But data viz libraries are really heavy, and so if we're sending the stats data viz libraries every single time, and that means that our users are loading literally a whole megabyte of JavaScript that 98% of them won't need. And so I looked at doing code splitting, which is a way to fix that problem. Now, if I'm being honest, the real reason I did it was because I reload the site dozens or hundreds of times every day, and it was getting slow, like 2 or 3 seconds slow, and that was just not okay. But once I sped it up, a backwards justification presented itself when one of our users said, hey, it actually works really well on airplane Wi-Fi. Oh, cool. Our partners spend a lot of time on airplanes, and I guess it works there. So I've got a demo of a quick app I threw together for this. And you can see there, we'll pretend it's the homepage. Again, I threw it together in a couple hours. We'll pretend this is a search box where you can search for companies. There are 2 in the hard-coded database, very extensive. And there's a map of both companies, Facebook and Acme. Facebook's in California, Acme's here in Ohio. Go them. And then here's a company's profile page. So we've got a map of where they are, and then one of the factors that we use when making an investment decision is, well, how big is the company? And so here is a made-up graph of Facebook's headcount dating back to roughly 2003. So that's an overview of the 98% case for our app. There are a whole set of 10 other scenarios where somebody might use it, and those are completely different features, and so we want to split that out. And actually the reason I chose a map and a chart, again, data viz libraries are super heavy, and I needed a demo that would include lots of JavaScript. But of note, I'm also not a designer, in case you couldn't tell. So that's a quick overview of our app. So you saw it's a React app. There was an app component at the very top level, and it uses React router, just the hash router at the very top, and it imports home, and it imports profile component, the home page and the profile. And the home page, it uses the map, and then the profile and the chart uses the map and the chart. So those are the 5 major components that we care about for the purposes of this demo. Anytime I'm going to be looking at performance of JavaScript, especially on initial load or over the wire, I pop open the Chrome Developer Tools. Specifically, I want to look at the network throttling here. If I'm sitting at work on super fast broadband with my high-end i7 laptop, I'm not getting representative performance, even for somebody just on their iPad in an Uber, especially if they're on an airplane. So I'll show you how to launch that. Shortcut to launch the network inspector on Mac, at least, Command-Alt-I, but it's accessible through the DevTools. And I'll go over here, I'm in the network tab, and what I want to do is, if we're representing airplane Wi-Fi, fast 3G is probably charitable, but I don't want to wait around forever for this demo, and so we'll stick with that. And so I've got the network tab open. If I just refresh. So anybody want coffee? Got some time. Okay, so it's about 5 seconds. And if we look here, final load was almost 6 seconds. Not so great, and that's only 800K across the wire. If you've been working on a single app for 2 or 3 years like we had, it might get to like 3 megabytes of JavaScript, which, if I'm doing my math correctly, would be about 16 seconds to load. Great. Okay, so we know our app is slow. What can we do about it? This is not a Webpack talk. I'm not Sean Larkin. My beard isn't nearly that awesome. And also, that would be like a 2-day workshop, and we don't have time for that. The good news is, Webpack 4 came out 2 days ago. I was building this whole thing on the Webpack 4 beta. Yeah, great choice. But Webpack 4 is much better than the previous versions in that it is mostly zero config. In fact, the only configuration that I needed to do that demo I showed you was Babel Loader, which you all use if you use React. Specifically 2 presets. The first one is preset env, kind of like the successor to ES 2015 preset or ES 2016 preset or stage 2 preset. This one takes all standard features and compiles them down to whatever target browser you need. So if you need to support the last 2 major versions, you can pass target greater than or equal to the last 2. It's really great. The only setting we care about here, though, is modules false. And what that does is it tells Babel to leave the ES6 import statements in our code alone. It will pass them directly through to Webpack so that it can see them and handle them by itself. And we also use preset React. Again, standard React app, nothing special about that. Cool, Webpack talk done. There's one tool that we want with Webpack, though, to help us with bundle splitting, and that is the Webpack Bundle Analyzer. NPM install it, require it in your Webpack config, and then add it to your plugins array. Again, plenty of options, but in this case, the defaults are great. What does it do for us? It pulls up this beautiful tree map of all of the code that's in our JavaScript application. So this main.js file and all of its imports represent 820K-ish. And we can see here's our node modules folder, and we've got D3 and data maps to present the map. We've got React DOM, some Lodash, why is that in there? Recharts, which is the employee count graph. That's all in there. So here's all of the code that's imported. And right now, it's all in a single bundle. 800K across the wire, 5-ish seconds. Let's split it up. But ES6 import statements are all static. They're resolved at compile time and included all in the same bundle. But there's a new feature, currently TC39 stage 3, called dynamic import. And so what stage 3 means, TC39 is the Atmospheric Standards Committee. It's a 4-stage process. By stage 3, features are mostly specified, and they're ready to be implemented in browsers and by tools like Babel. And the expectation is that they will advance to stage 4, part of the standard, unless some major issues are found with the implementation. So this feature is pretty stable. And what it allows us to do is, instead of import module from path, we can call it like a function at runtime. So we pass it the same sort of path name that we would an import statement. And it returns a promise, an ES6 promise. Nothing special about that. And in the promises callback, we have a reference to our dynamically imported at runtime module. And we can do whatever we want with it. If it's a React component, we can render it. If it exports a function, we can call it. If it declares constants, then we can reference them. Now, because it's a stage 3 feature, we do need to include, in addition to our 2 presets, one Babel transform. Once this feature advances to stage 4 as part of the JavaScript standard as expected, then you won't need that part because it'll be parsed by default. For now, you do need it. So how might we use this inside of React? One of the heavy components in my demo was the employee chart. And if you think back, we didn't actually need it on the home page where we just needed the map. So we were loading a few hundred K of JavaScript that we didn't actually need. So what if we made that async and didn't import it until we actually needed it? So here is a very minimal async chart component that wraps my chart. And it's a normal React component, so as part of initializing this React component, we will store an empty chart component in state. Right now it's initialized to null. We don't have anything. And when we render, we go and pull the chart component out of state. But because it's null right now, we're just going to render loading. But then once the component mounts, we're going to import it, which tells Webpack and the browser to go fetch that JavaScript, parse it, and make it available to us in the promise callback. The chart exports a default React component, and we take that and store it in state. That state update triggers a re-render, but now chart is actually a React component. And so we render the component passing props, and our usage is just like any other React component, except this one is loaded dynamically at runtime. Now, that demo was missing niceties like error handling and all of the other things that you want to do. Enter React Loadable, which is a great JavaScript library by James Kyle, who also built the code slide component for this presentation. He does a ton of great open source work. React Loadable does all of the things that the async chart component did, and a whole lot more, like error handling. Step 1, npm install and import the loadable higher order component. We need a spinner, and because I vaguely remember the internet in the 90s, it's a marquee element. Then we just wrap our import statement. So we call loadable, which is a higher order React component. It needs a loader, which is just a function that when loadable calls it, will call import and then return that promise so that React Loadable can handle it itself. And it needs a loading spinner. There are other options, but these are the two required ones, and good enough for a quick demo. But you'll notice the usage is exactly the same as the async chart component that I have in the previous slide. Now here's the component diagram that I showed you previously. App, home, and profile are both pretty small components, tens of lines each. We wrote them ourselves, nothing fancy about that. It's the map and the chart that pull in those NPM libraries that are each hundreds of kilobytes of JavaScript. So let's try to make those asynchronous. So we get our home.js file, which is just a normal component. Imports React, it imports React router's link. We add an import for React Loadable. We import our spinner component, marquee element. And then we replace our static import of the map component with a loadable import that will do it dynamically. And then our usage of that doesn't change. When we render our component, it doesn't care whether it's a normal React component or a normal React component wrapped by React Loadable, which itself is just a React component. It just does some fancy stuff. We also want to go to the profile, load React Loadable, import our spinner, and then we'll replace our static chart import with the loadable component, and we'll replace the map import with the loadable component. And again, our usage doesn't change one bit. So here's Webpack Bundle Analyzer with the output after those code changes. I haven't changed my Webpack config file at all yet. In fact, the defaults from Webpack 4 are pretty great. So what it's done is, here's the node modules that are needed to render that chart. It's got recharts, it's got some libraries here, and we've got some line charts and a whole bunch of, oh, there's Lodash, hello. Recharts, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff for that. And for our map component, that's also going to be loaded asynchronously now. We've got data maps and we've got D3. D3 itself is showing up as 329K. And I'm just going to go ahead and hide those for now. And then we've got main, which is loaded when I first go visit the app. It's got some node modules including React DOM and React Router. And it's also got our home and profile components. And then, for reasons that will become important a little bit later, it also included separately the chart.js and map.js files, separately from their node modules folders. I'll cover that in a little bit, but it's actually a really great default from Webpack. Thank you, team. So, with those changes, what are we looking at? Open Network Inspector, go to Fast3G, and refresh. So you see, this time I had an interactive page in only 2 seconds, followed by a beautiful marquee element as the map was loading. But the page was interactive already in only 2 seconds. So we started at 6, down to 2, and we loaded the map, which probably didn't need to exist. It's the very first thing that the user saw. And it's all done in just over 4 seconds. I can now go, and there's another marquee element while it loads the employee chart, and there you go. But the user could already be interacting with the map and everything else on the profile while it was loading this chart here below the fold. It's like free performance. All right, cool. But we can do better by preloading. So this time, we want to preload the chart. And so this is our home file. And let's say that we're pretending those links are a search box. We know that anytime a user clicks into the search box and starts typing, they're going to visit a profile page. So we can optimistically load the chart. So what we do, we've imported React Loadable already. We just add a component, a loadable component, for the chart. And we don't render it. But if we remember those links, for the purposes of this demo, they're all inside a list. Or they could be inside a text box or a dropdown. But in this case, we listen for the onMouseOver event and call chart.preload whenever I mouse over the links. So, again, I'll open the DevTools, make sure it's nice and slow, give it a hard refresh. So what I have so far, I've got my main code, and I've got my map. And let's say I'm going to go visit a profile. So I click in, and I start typing, and oh, there's a network request happening in the background. Here's my profile, I want to visit Facebook. Hey look, component's already loaded. Boom, done, free performance. Now, there's one other thing that I mentioned that Webpack does that's really smart. And that was splitting the node modules out from the chart and map components. And that's beneficial when you want to get into caching. So if you've seen, or if you've done this yourself, when you compile your JavaScript, you add a hexadecimal string at the end of the file name. And that lets you tell the web browser, hey, cache this file literally forever, because the content of the file will not change based on the hash name. It means that when your users visit your application again, they already have most of your code cached, and there's no network round trips. And so to get Webpack to add those hashes to the file names, we add these lines to the Webpack config. File names just include the chunk hash, which is the SHA-1 or whatever it is hash of the file's contents. And then we can do some further optimizations. One of those is a runtime chunk. Webpack includes a runtime, and that will give you the hashes of all of the files that Webpack has generated, so that when it needs, say, chart.js, it knows which components to dynamically load and request from the server. And we tell it to split all chunks. So if you remember before, we had a main.js chunk that had React and React Router, but also some of our main code in it. That's great, but when you're doing this long-term caching, you can actually do a little bit better than that. So what you do is you put all of your node modules in separate vendors chunks. Because those change less often, say every few weeks or every few months, whenever you update your dependencies, the user's much more likely to have already cached those. If that's, say, 90% of your bundle, then you've automatically saved 90% of your traffic across the wire just by telling them, hey, this content hasn't changed. By splitting out your individual code, you can then deploy. Let's see. So here's actually the code we wrote. And assuming we haven't installed any new dependencies, this is cached, and this is cached, and this is cached, and all we need to send to the browser is this little thing down here. So, yeah, yep, it's about 821 bytes. And that's the Webpack runtime, but we'll dig into that in a second. So you remember, this was recharts, that's our employee chart, and D3 and data maps, so that's the map. I'll go ahead and hide those. This used to be our main, but now we've taken out our home and profile components and our app component, the things that we're probably changing in multiple commits every day. And this just includes React and React Router, and those dependencies aren't going to change very much. So this one's effectively going to be cached forever. And what we're left with, let's see, this is 3K, that's 1K, that's half a K, and that's about half a K. Cool. So we've got a few kilobytes of JavaScript, and that's all of our app code. You see, here's our main bundle. That'll be loaded when the user first visits the site. It's got all the components it needs to render the very first version of the site. It'll automatically import the map, and then we'll preload the chart. And this is the Webpack runtime, which is Webpack's map of where all the files live. So let's say I were to make a change to the chart component. Say I were to change the style rule or something. Because all of the other code doesn't change, the hashes remain consistent. So my node modules don't change, that 800K that I've already saved. And the main JS file doesn't change, so that's still cached. And map doesn't change. So the only two files that change are the 1K chart file and the half K Webpack runtime file. So we've gone from sending 800K across the wire to sending, after I deploy a new change to my site, 1.5K. So let's demo that. So I'm going to load with the disabled cache the first time. And we'll see what performance looks like. So we've seen the same things as before. It loads the home component, and then it loads the map component. And I'm preloading this, and it just finished. Cool. But if I enable caching now, and I refresh, it was already there. And it's already there. So I went from a 6-second load to down here, I'm under 1 second by adding a few lines to my Webpack config and changing a little bit about how I do my imports thanks to React Loadable. Free performance. Oh, that's cut off. I thought I tested that. Any questions? Yes.
It sounds like you just put this demo together very recently, but assuming you've been playing with this in your day-to-day work for a while and gotten comfortable with it, have you come across any good patterns for kind of deciding what things are lazy loaded or prefetched and split out what isn't? Because I'm looking at the simple demo and it's awesome, that I'm thinking back to some of what we do at our shop, and it's many orders of magnitude more. I'm trying to think of, how do you kind of start biting off chunks of something like this?
So we started using Webpack 3, and that you had to use Commons Chunk plugin, and everything was much more complex. This version is a whole lot simpler to get started with, just because the defaults are much better. But to get started, it was a pretty manual process of just pulling up the bundle analyzer and seeing what components look like really big squares on the graph and don't need to be shown on the home page. And so the first ones I pulled out were the stats components that build kind of ugly bar charts for our stats page, but they're only used on 2% of them. And it's still a manual process. We just check it occasionally, and we see if our main bundle has grown. And if our target is to be a little just over half a second or so on Wi-Fi to have a page loaded and interactive. And we'll notice, as again, I load the page dozens or hundreds of times, if it's getting a little slow, and I'll pull up Bundle Analyzer and see, oh, that library mistakenly got merged. And so it's really just the low-hanging fruit, split that out, and we're pretty good about having those massive visualization libraries separate from the rest of our app. Another example, Dropbox released a password strength library, ZXCVBN. It includes a whole dictionary of passwords that have been compromised. And that library itself is like 800K. And it's only used on our account page, so that's an easy one. Like, our account page is a separate bundle, and the last time we changed our account page was probably 6 months ago. So it's been cached since then. Anything else? Cool. I hope I didn't lose you all. That's me on Twitter, by the way.
Thanks so much, Brandon. So covers the main topics for tonight. Just want to wrap up kind of the main event just by doing a couple of quick announcements. So again, anybody that's interested in doing a talk at a future event, any companies that might be interested in hosting, please do reach out to us either through Meetup or through the Slack group. We are always looking for new speakers and new hosts. The event for next month has not yet been finalized, but we should have the announcement for that coming out here hopefully later this week. And we'll be sure to get that out to you and make sure that we have a good event. And not sure if we'll end up doing talks for that one or if we'll make do a bit of a combination of some workshops too. But with that, I guess that's kind of the main event tonight, and feel free to enjoy more pizza, and we'll see you next time.
I remember after the last